and enjoying the insightful sessions from our speakers. So, now let's welcome our final speaker of the webinar, Miss Neha Kuram, an executive coach and resume writer with 10 years plus of experience working predominantly in the US and Canadian market as a recruiter, hiring manager, and community builder. So, hi Neha, how are you? Can you hear me? Hello? All right, guys, there must be some glitch, and let's just wait for her to join.
There. Good to see you
Hi.
all. Thanks
All
so
right,
much for
now
being
we can finally see you. Welcome to our webinar, Neha, and thank you so much for joining us today. The stage is all yours, and you can get your session started.
great. Thanks so much, Tripti. Well, it's great to meet you all. I'm sure you all have lots of questions, especially if you are job seeking currently. You might be wondering how you can improve your resume and improve your chances of landing an interview. So feel free to leverage the chat and ask questions. I'll be taking a look and I'll be pulling questions as I go through the session. And I'll also add my LinkedIn in case you would like to connect with me. I'll just add it to the chat so you can stay connected after this conversation. But just to get started, if you are currently job seeking, I want you to think about your job in three parts, your job search in three parts. There's market positioning, interview success, and offer negotiation. So from point A to point B, there's quite a few opportunities to revamp your resume as you move from market positioning to interview to offer stage. There might be other opportunities you're pursuing concurrently. And so I want you to always think about having one set career direction at a time as you're going through that journey. And if at the end of it you find that there's offers that are not in line with what you're looking for, that's when you pivot and change directions. And the reason is when you're positioning yourself in the market, if you are updating your LinkedIn every other day with something new, if you're changing your resume, if you're applying to multiple roles at one company, it makes you look confused. So there's a saying in the market, if you confuse, you lose. So, really be clear on your career direction before you start to craft your resume and before you start to apply for jobs, before you update your LinkedIn. There shouldn't be any discrepancies between your LinkedIn profile, your let's say if you have a website or any social footprint online, it should align with everything that's listed on your resume. Otherwise, those discrepancies can call into question how truthful you are about your background. And that's where, if you are pivoting, make sure that when you pivot, everything across all your channels online and your resume are updated so that the dates match, the titles match, the work experience matches, the location matches. A few tips for your resume that I highly recommend are to always use action verbs. So instead of writing out your bullet points like a job description, try to frame it as an accomplishment and always lead with an action verb, such as uh, created. Let's say that's an action verb, or strategized, or it could be directed, managed, accomplished, sold X amount of revenue in a quarter. So always thinking about your target goals and thinking about measurements, what were your measures of success, and including that. And sometimes it can be a little bit arbitrary to have a dollar amount, or let's say like a time bound experience on your resume. So that's where I would encourage you to think about the delta, so the change that you actually had. So think about calculating, the change in percentage and adding that instead of sort of an arbitrary number that might not resonate with your employer. Um, I'm looking at some of the questions in the chat. So, well, I see a lot of LinkedIn profiles. So I'm just going to try to find questions. Jugjote has a comment. I'm a recent graduate from mobile solutions development, Conestoga. Okay, building new connections. Does anyone have questions? Okay, no questions. Interesting.
But
Um,
you can
yep.
see questions on the icon below
Ah,
comment. There's Q&A,
okay. I
so you
see
will
it.
see
I
some
see it.
questions there. Yeah.
Great. Okay, it was just in a different tab. Okay. So, question, are beautiful and creative resume templates actually recommended? I heard they don't work as well with AI tools that recruiters may be using to filter candidates that hit the keywords. So, to that, I would say think first, design later. I think it's much more important and critical to have the right content. So it should be in a readable format. I would say just sticking to a Google Doc or a Word doc with, you know, minimal use of color, if at all. If you use color, make sure it's neutral. So try using gray, brown, blue. Try not to use too much color, if at all, and instead use font and font sizes and bold. I wouldn't even use italics, to be honest, to try to differentiate the different sections. Try to keep it as neutral as possible, and maybe just highlight your title and the dates. um, and always include whether the role was hybrid, remote, on site, as that's becoming more important for employers to see whether you have experience working on site versus remote versus hybrid. When it comes to the template, it's the last thing you should think about. The first thing you should think about is the actual content, your accomplishments, and the wording, and just having the right information that matches the job description, right? So I would also recommend studying the job description. So, as I said, have a set career direction. It could be that there's a few different job titles that align to that career direction, but they're all sort of under the same umbrella. And then it becomes a little easier to then update your resume before you apply. You're not spending an hour each time. Instead, you're just spending 10 to 15 minutes brushing it up and looking at the job description and reusing the same resume because it's aligned to your target career direction, right? So that's where switching your direction is not a good idea. Other questions I see, are cover letters mandatory? If they're not asking for a cover letter, you really don't need to write one. It's good to have a template ready to then, redevelop each time you're applying to a role that asks for it. But more and more, I'm seeing that cover letters are, going out of fashion. But some hiring managers prefer having a cover letter because they want to see whether you've read the job opportunity and read about the company. And if you've actually studied and done your homework and you're really intentional about it, that's the benefit of a cover letter, to show that, hey, I'm really interested in this specific opportunity in this specific company. And do it if they've asked, or if you, let's say, are extremely excited about an opportunity, it's your top priority, maybe spending a little bit of extra time on a cover letter and sending that along if there's space to add that file. Great. Otherwise, I do think that managing your time and your priorities is key in your job search. So do it if it's asked, do it if the job is a high priority, the company is a high priority. Otherwise, your resume should suffice. Just doing a 10 to 15-minute brush up, and applying, and then moving on and keeping up momentum in your job search, right? Max 2 pages without any BS. Exactly. So, a lot of people will say, one page or else it's too much, but I disagree. I think sometimes there's not enough information in one page for me to really determine whether this person is a good fit. If it's your first job that you're applying to and you don't really have a lot of experience, then it makes sense to keep everything to one page. But if you need to stretch to two pages to fit all your experience, I think you should be aiming for at least 4 to 5 bullet points per work experience for the past 5 years. Anything before 5 years, maybe you have about 3 to 4 bullet points, but make sure that you're aligning to the job description and you're not leaving out critical information that the hiring manager needs to see in order to invite you for an interview. Okay, so if you're looking for support on your resume, you can reach out on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to set up a call if you're interested in getting a paid resume rewrite. I offer those at discounted rates for anyone that is either a student, unemployed, or a recent immigrant. And then if you're currently working somewhere, of course, that sliding scale might not apply, but happy to consider working with you if you'd like to reach out on LinkedIn. Which AI tool would you recommend to work with our resume? So you can get pretty clever with ChatGPT. You can use a prompt such as I would say copy pasting your resume into ChatGPT and just writing uh, you know, a prompt saying match my resume as pasted below, paste it with this job description, and then paste the job description and see what it shares with you. And you might want to try breaking this up into pieces where if you have a job that aligns really well with the job description, maybe you just copy paste certain sections of your resume and the job description at a time to align with the roles and responsibilities, or improve the writing, right? So if you're curious about how to use ChatGPT for your resume, feel free to message me on LinkedIn and I can share a few prompts for you. But typically, I would say writing it in your own words is 100% better because people can see through when something is written by AI. AI is good to just give you ideas or to help you kind of cross reference between two data sets, but you should be thinking about supplying good information at the get-go, and that is an art in itself, right? Which is where a career coach or a resume writer can help you unearth all of the wealth of experience and accomplishments that you have that might be difficult to put into writing in the first place. All right. So, can you give an example or show how a perfect resume looks if you have any? So, I do run through ideal resume, templates with my clients. And I'm happy to provide, a template if you are serious about working together. I'm happy to run through that on a one-to-one basis. Other questions: if I have skills that apply to both web development and Android development, can I apply to both? Do I need to have two resumes for them? So I think when it comes to web development and Android development, I think it's still under the umbrella of developer. So it's okay to show some range within, within that space. That to me, that's still relatively the same career direction, but just being really clear about maybe your focus if you wanted to add a career objective. Let's say every time you reapply to a job, you can change your career objective rather than changing the whole resume. You can align your career objective to the job that you're applying to. So if you're applying to an Android developer role, you state that as your objective, and it's an easy way to showcase that, okay, you've read the job application and maybe you add a little bit of a summary as to why you're a good fit for Android development, and then they can see that you have some breadth and range across web development, but you don't have to necessarily do a whole new resume each time. And it really depends on your experience. Let's say if your experience leans heavily one way versus the other, um, but you're looking to apply to that other side, then maybe you need a new resume that kind of you know, leans more on this new side that you're pivoting towards. So I think, you always have to keep your audience in mind. Just think about if somebody had no idea who you are, has never worked with you in the past, and all they have to go off of is your resume. Do you look like the right person for the role compared to somebody else who's done the exact job before? Right? Because recruiters are oftentimes looking for someone who's done the exact job before. And if you haven't, then you need to be a bit more creative and clever with how you tell your story. You might even need to remove some things from your resume, because if you look like you're all over the place, that's probably not a good fit for that specific role, unless you're a generalist applying to a generalist type of role. That's the only exception, right? Or if you're applying to a startup, usually they're looking for generalists and people who can jump into different roles. So I think part of this just has to do with studying the job description. In terms of another tool, so I'm just going to make sure that I have uh the right web page. JobScan, and if it's not jobscan.io, it might be jobscan.co. Let me just check. Yeah, it's jobscan.co. They give you 5 free resume scans. So you would kind of what I was saying you can do with ChatGPT. A better way to do it is with jobscan.co. You can copy paste the job description and your resume to see if you match and what you want to change. So I'll add that to the Q&A. So my LinkedIn is in my profile. It's also in the chat. But if you search for my name, Neha Koram, based in Toronto, or actually it might say based in Barrie, I recently moved, you'll find me there. Other questions. How do you capture career gaps in the resume? This is a really good one. So if you have a long gap, try to find either a volunteer opportunity, or if you decide to do some freelancing, or if you decide to study, use that gap to kind of reflect how you've been keeping busy, right? The red flag for any employer is if you've been sitting idle, you haven't been developing yourself, you haven't studied anything, you haven't volunteered, you haven't been involved in your community. That's usually a red flag. But I know that this is the case for a lot of people. Let's say if you were sick, or if you were looking after some personal life opportunities. Like, try to tell a story that shows you were productive. Find a way to do that. It's a lot harder to do, let's say, if you were sick. But I think if you wanted to just take 4 weeks or so, or as you're applying, even if you just add to your resume that you've enrolled in a course, or you're currently taking a course, and there's many free ones, right? If you look at Coursera or Google certificates or LinkedIn Learning, even just adding some of those courses to show what areas of interest you have, what functional areas that you're looking to develop, and that you've taken some initiative, and that your brain is on and alert and ready to contribute. That's what they're looking for, right? Otherwise, they might think maybe this person still needs some more time to work on themselves before getting back into the workplace. So that's the risk that they're looking to avoid. But there are clever ways to manage that. Okay. Other questions. Are we going to connect with partnered companies mentioned in event details? I'm not sure about that. I think Tripti might be able to share more about that. Um, when it comes to career gaps, I will say, let's say if there was like 3 months, that's okay. 3 months between a job, you don't really need to share too much there. But if it's anything more than 3 months, I would be looking for some kind of story or indication that you were busy and involved in some capacity. Can skills taken or learned from online platforms be considered? Absolutely, 100%. Your resume is all about storytelling, and if you can prove to me that you know how to implement a skill, and there's some proof, let's say you built something online, like you built a web page, or you contributed to a side project, or you were volunteering, In fact, with volunteering, I often like to recommend using the term leadership and community involvement. Leadership and community involvement is a good heading for any volunteer section to show how you're contributing, right? Some people, like for example, I was talking to somebody, one of my clients the other day. So she provides English translation for religious text, and she's been doing that for 8 years, and that actually shows a lot of initiative. And she's looking to get a job in a more marketing oriented role that requires editing, writing, proofreading. And she's been doing this for 8 years, but in a volunteer capacity. But that should definitely be on the resume. So there's all these areas of our life where our skills are present, but because we weren't paid for it, we're hesitant to add it to the resume. So I would like for you to think creatively and maybe include that in your volunteer or leadership and community involvement section of the resume. Other questions. We have 2 minutes, so we'll try to power through this. I find open job offers, but they always have so many applicants, but I still apply anyway. What are the chances of getting selected for an interview as someone who doesn't have industry experience? So it's a lot harder if you don't have industry experience. You're basically doing what we call spraying and praying, right? Like you're spraying your resume and you're praying that somebody gives you an opportunity. I would say there's so many resources online, like I said, with LinkedIn Learning, Coursera, um, you know, bridging programs if you're willing to spend some money. Um, but a lot of it you can just learn on your own and just add it to your resume, and then try to volunteer, try to find freelance opportunities, even if you're like being paid minimal, just to get some experience on your resume. And that way you can then start to pivot in that direction, and also learn how to approach recruiters, approach hiring managers, and do it in a thoughtful way, where rather than just asking for a job, you're trying to build a relationship with them. And that's where going out to networking opportunities and networking events is also a great way to present yourself and highlight your candidacy outside of just the resume. But hopefully that gives you a handful of tips. Sorry I couldn't get through all the questions. um, but I'm just looking at the speaker chat. So I do have other meetings, unfortunately, but please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn for more. Thank you all, and hopefully we can continue the conversation offline.
Hi. Thank you so much, Neha. And it was a wonderful, thoughtful words, and I'm sure it has proven to be really, really helpful for our audience. And guys, like she said, you can always connect with her on LinkedIn, and she's mentioned her LinkedIn here on the comment section. And unfortunately, we do not have more time with her as she's a little caught up. So you can always contact her and network with her on LinkedIn. Yes. And
Yeah.
thank you so much, Neha, for joining us today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Enjoy the rest of the day. Bye.
Bye bye. All right, guys. Well, this brings us to the end of speaking sessions for today's webinar. I want to thank all of you for your commitment to making this webinar successful. Your support is really crucial, and without anyone here, this webinar wouldn't be possible. Now it's time to build your networks, so you can feel free to visit the lounge area where you can interact with our speakers and connect with each other to expand your network. All the very best to each and every one for your future endeavors. Take care.